Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Economy and Development Select Committee. I'm Councillor Alan Davis and chairing this meeting today in the absence of Councillor Pavia, who has a domestic issue and can't be here, but he will be texting some questions. He'll be watching the meeting and he will ask his questions via Richard here as the meeting progresses. So if we can... Everybody can introduce ourselves before we start on the agenda, please. As I said, I'm Councillor Alan Davis, Vice Chair of the committee.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Kath Fallon, Head of Enterprise and Community Development.
Francis Williams, Chief Officer Enterprise.
Peter Fox, Leader of the Council.
Bob Greenland, Deputy Leader.
Mark Hand, Head of Housing, Planning and Place Shaping.
Rachel Lewis, Planning Policy Manager.
Jez Becker, Member of the Committee, lonely at the front.
Councillor Louise Brown, not a member, a visiting member. Thank you.
Brian Strong, a member of this committee.
David Dovey, member of the committee and councillor for St Kingsmark Ward in Chepstow.
Good morning, Richard Roden, councillor for Dixton with Osbaston Ward, Monmouth, and member of this committee.
Morning, County Councillor Roger Harris, Cressona Ward, Abergavenny, and observing this committee.
James Woodcock, Business Insights Manager.
Right, thank you all. We'll go on to the agenda. Any apologies for absence, Richard?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Pavia and Feekins.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? As and when? Thank you. I don't think there's any members of the public here today, so we'll move on to the next item, which is item 4, Economies of the Future Analysis.
Yeah, well, thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. Good to be with you at the Select Committee this morning, and I'm pleased Councillor Greenland is obviously with us as well, because Bob will lead us through some of this. But just, I just wanted to thank the Select Committee in advance, really, to help and support us in the policy development of this fundamental piece of work, which will help inform other key pieces of work for us, obviously, as we've talked, as the report talks about, including the LDP. So, a piece of true policy development work, and so it's just it'll be really helpful. I know you looked at this back in May, would it have been May last year, April last year, and some very positive comments, and obviously, that deeper interrogation really of this data will be really crucial as we look to move forward. And Cabinet will be very much looking forward to your views to help shape the future direction that the Council should take in the many areas which have identified in here. I'll hand over to Bob, because obviously Bob, as you'll see, commissioned this piece of work some while ago, and perhaps I can reflect then a little later on, because this crosses so many areas, doesn't it? It crosses our own Monmouthshire Economic Development Strategy. It looks at how we play into the wider Cardiff Capital Region and the opportunities that are built around that, and how do we make the best of this real moment in time where we can shape the future for the future generations of Monmouthshire and the wider region. Perhaps, Chair, if I could invite Bob.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I think we realised a number of years ago that we had a problem in Monmouthshire which was only going to get worse. Our demographics were such that we had an ageing population, and as we know from our current budgets, we are having to put more and more money into supporting social services, particularly for the elderly. and we don't have the balance of the working population within Monmouthshire, which we really need to make us sustainable into the future. And yet, at the same time, we also recognise that with the City deal coming along, there were opportunities that we might take, once-in-a-generation opportunities, really, to rebalance our economy and ensure that the county moving forward was sustainable. And so we had undertaken this analysis of the situation, and you've got the report in front of you. And we as a council now, all of us, will have to make a decision about what is the direction that we want to go. Are we prepared to move on in the same way as we have been, which is actually only going to make the situation worse? Our economy is going to become even less balanced than it is. More and more will our social services be called on to help the elderly, and the working population will continue to decrease. And we will not have the businesses here that we need to attract younger people into the county. And of course, if you want younger people to come into the county to work, you have to provide them with the houses. And of course, at the moment, we're going through the processes of the LDP. And so this work and the decisions that the council will make about the future will help us with our LDP as well. It'll give us the grounding. And really, we're going to have to decide, do we want to go on as we are? Or do we want to take the bold approach, which the consultants have suggested is an option for us? That will come with difficulties because it will undoubtedly mean that we would need more housing, and we would need more land to support new businesses as well. That's not going to be an easy choice, but I think we also need to recognise that although the conception, the idea that people might have is that you're going to build on a lot more of the county, I think there's the report which shows that actually only 3% of the land in this county is built on for housing. So even a fairly large increase in the, and I say large increase, not proportionally to the amount we've got, but the bolder approach that the report is suggesting is not going to flood us with houses throughout the county by any means. You would hardly actually, in terms of land use, notice the difference. So we have some important choices to make. One of the areas as well, which I think is vitally important, is that a county like ours is attractive to people for its town centres. And yet we know that our town centres are under great pressure at the moment. It's not just us in Monmouthshire, obviously. It's everywhere throughout the UK. And I think we also have to recognise that this is an opportunity to rethink what our town centres might look like. The allocation of commercial space, retail space, the opportunity to bring people living back into our town centres above existing premises, and perhaps in some of the outlying areas which are at the moment devoted to retail. Do we need all that retail? Is there a new mix that would show that we have vibrant town centres moving into the future? All of this needs to be talked about and discussed, and we need to have reached a policy decision as a council, and then we can move with the LDP to actually deliver what are our aspirations for the future. So this is an important piece of work, and whilst it will be a council decision the way that we go, obviously as an Economy and Development Committee, Cabinet, who will eventually consider this, first of all, would like your views on the reports that have been done and the suggestions of way forwards. As I've said, it's particularly important at the moment that we look at this because of the city deal. Once in a generation opportunity to bring investment into the county and into this southeast region. And it's, you know that we've made the biggest investment at the moment that we've done through City Deal is into IQE, which is bringing huge opportunities. But that's an investment which will be, we will actually get that money back and have the opportunity of reinvestment for that, as we will for other areas that we move through with City Deal. So the effect of City Deal is going to last a number of years. We could be talking 20 years ahead, and we're still feeling the advantages of the City Deal if we make those investments in the proper way. But Pete might want to say more about that. But I'm really interested to know your views on the report that you've got in front of you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So there's several areas you can see that we need to look at this. We need to look at it from a local perspective. We need to, even if City Deal wasn't here, we need to think about our Monmouthshire economy in the longer term, and how do we retain the strength, the young people? How do we create for them? How do we stop our demographic changing so radically to an aging population? How do we create that vibrancy in Monmouthshire? We have some brilliant assets in Monmouthshire, but we know, we need to create more opportunity. The city region, as Bob says, opens up huge potential, and as I've shared many times, the region is a relatively small geographical area, but it houses half of the Welsh population. So opportunities which grow in this region really can have a benefit to the residents and the future generations of Monmouthshire. But we have an opportunity to shape that as well, especially as the city region evolves and it works far closer with our colleagues in Bristol, in the Bristol area, and the emerging Western powerhouse. There is a lot of opportunity here. Bridge tolls coming down have created, dilemmas, but will create opportunities as well. But we know, along with the proposed way forward in here, there are going to be real challenges. And I know members will talk to these, I'm sure, during this meeting, about infrastructural needs to support the various either industrial expansion or housing expansion. But what I do know is that most of us have children, or we know people with lots of children, and we want them to have an opportunity to live, grow, and bring their own families up in this area, and hopefully access high quality jobs. At the moment, local jobs don't pay brilliantly in Monmouthshire, yet the price of housing is massively high, driving our young people away. We need to reverse that trend. There's an onus on us in this time, I think, to start shaping the future, and it's we can't ignore this, or it's a big piece of work, and but it just this moment in time presents a real opportunity for us to set the direction. We can look at same old, and we can sort of carry on with things as they've always been, and we see a greater decline, if you like, in the working population as the aging population grows. Is that what we want, or do we want to see a vibrant place where our young people, our grandchildren, can live and grow and work? And that's where I've always been rooted in that picture from a City Deal perspective, and Monmouthshire's part in City Deal. So, Chairman, I think this really gives food for thought, and and hasn't got all the answers, but it stimulates a discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Before I move on to questions, I'd like to welcome Councillor Watts. Would you like to introduce yourself, Councillor Watts?
Rightly point out, I am Councillor Watts. So I was caught in the fog, but the fog is now cleared, Chair.
As long as the fog is cleared in your head, that's all we want. Right, can I ask for questions, please? Councillor Becker.
Thank you, Chair. I'll get the ball rolling. I think, the reports, the is great in the sense that it certainly recognises all the correct issues. What concerns me is whether we have enough ambition in what we're thinking of as solutions for those issues. I would start, I've got a couple of areas that I'll focus off, but I'll start and then give over to some of my colleagues on the planning and housing aspects of our plan. I think that whilst we have this fact that we bandy about at the moment that only 3% of the county is built on, you can probably guess that 80% of that 3% is in the south of the county. So for the people who are living in our county, the idea of more building already in areas where they are being, we have the bulk of the housing, is concerning. And I think as well, not necessarily sustainable for well-being and proper economic growth of the county. The major key to that is the housing mix. We've said about the house prices being uninviting to young people and also the infrastructure associated with that being uninviting to them. When we are essentially selling off our assets to the highest bidder of the big five, who then build 3 or 4 bed executive homes, which are completely inappropriate to the housing mix if we want sustainable growth. So for me, we're talking about the right things, but we're talking about clustering it potentially in the wrong way. But there is talk of a new settlement in there. I like the idea of us trying to move out of the density around some of the town centres. But even with density around the town centres, that's going to come. It's about having that right housing mix. How do we do it? I want to see more community land trusts. I want to see, us create a fertile ground for the creation of those. I want to see us support people who want to bring that kind of thing. I want to see a different priority given to how we sell our assets, so that capital receipts take a back seat to well-being of future generations. So I'd like to see that as the mix. So that ends my rant really on housing. There's not much of a question in there other than, what do you think of that? And I'll hand over to somebody else so I can rant about something else later. So.
Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think just following on from what Councillor Becker has said, I think it is important to look at affordable housing, but I'm not quite sure that the way that we're dealing with it at the moment and the way that's possibly being suggested as a way forward is the right way, because we can just look at the Maybe site, for example, and that's I think it was supposed to be either 25% or 35% affordable housing, and it's turning out to be about 30 out of 300 units. So, and also you've got the problem with developers is that they will actually argue that because of viability issues, then they're not going to give us the affordable housing we want. So I think we need to look at other solutions, like, for example, our own sites in the town centres, to see if they can be looked at for affordable housing. The other thing that I am concerned about is that when I spoke to, we talk about the demographics, and when I spoke to a young person who lives in Caldicott, who moved from Bristol to live back in Roggett, I asked her why did she do it, and I thought she'd probably say, oh, because her family was in the area. But the answer that she gave was that because she liked the rural nature of Monmouthshire. Now, I am concerned, looking at the proposed Monmouthshire replacement LDP vision, which is on page 101, is that we don't include those issues that make Monmouthshire
Councillor Brown, can I just point out,
unique.
I understand the points you're making, but we are talking at the moment about economies of the future, and there will be an opportunity to raise those issues about housing when we move on to the next section, which will
All
be
right, yeah, thank you, Chair, because I
plan.
thought that because so much was spoken about that particular aspect and
so
housing,
can I remind
assume we were on the other report, but I'll come back again. Thank you,
Can I
Chair.
remind all members that this first part of this meeting is about economies of the future, and we are talking about how we develop the business side, which is, in my opinion, is equally as important as the housing side. So can we keep our questions on the topic that's on the agenda, please? Councillor Watts, I understand you wanted to say something.
I guess with the if I may, Chair, through you, with the city deal, I have some concerns that, perhaps you'll tell me that I'm wrong, that with IQE, whilst it's a great idea, I worry that we might have put all our eggs in one basket, and I make reference to what happened in Chepstow with the other tech company there, which I'm not going to name because I don't think it's fair on them, but they were almost exclusively, I think they had 11% of their stock was owned by Apple, but their biggest contract was Apple, and suddenly Apple decided that they didn't really want to use their intellectual property anymore, and they effectively lost their license, and then were susceptible to market forces and now being bought out by the Chinese, which isn't really a surprise. And I worry really, particularly with the share price being so volatile, if those that look at those kind of things are interested, that it was one of the most shorted companies in the history of the stock market until recently. So I worry about our focus on that as being a kind of, if things go wrong, what's our kind of liability? But I'm also, obviously, I get where Peter's coming from. I think he's obviously saying what needs to be said, and he's saying the right things. But the overall demographic, which does fit into what we're saying, 48, I think, and our consultant said that we need to reduce it to 46, we'd have to build effectively, I'm straying into territory, a new dwelling. That has obviously some serious kind of economic impact. But beyond that, and you might expect me to say this as well, it's what we do with our older people then. What happens to, the rest, Peter in, say, 15 years' time, or even me in 15 years' time? Who's going to be able to, from an economic perspective, raise enough revenue from the existing population to prop up our ever-increasing elderly population? So forgive me, I heard an absolutely fantastic programme, because I'm of an age now where I listen to the World Service, about the impact and you'd expect me to raise issues to do with old age, diseases, dementia particularly, and how that impacts on the population, and particularly women. Women, because they are the carers and they're obviously skilled at bringing up children, and then subsequently have to forgo their careers. Now, where I'm going with this, I know I'm going off a little bit, is that our existing provision within the plan isn't sufficient. All we're doing is replacing like for like. So whilst I think the initiative that you're building in Crick is fantastic, it's the nursing home there effectively, it isn't going to touch the sides, Peter. It really isn't. So I'll just park it up there. So there are broader issues.
I think there were several questions in that. Peter, if you'd like to.
Yeah, thanks, Armand. And it's interesting. I attended the Cardiff Capital Region Select Committee last week in Newport to talk to or take questions along with the director of the City Deal on IQE, rather, not IQE, but more the compound semiconductor area that we have invested in, and we were being challenged because we did that quite quickly, and there were same points came about, share price, because there was quite a dip in share price. I mean, I always think, well, look, we're in the long game. You've got to think, where was the share price of IQE when it started? It climbed, and then there's some change, but through short-term selling and different things like that. However, it's you've got to remember that the compound semi industry is going to be absolutely fundamental, and it's not just about IQE. It's about the cluster, the developing compound semiconductor related cluster. We already have a huge amount of a lot of businesses right around the region which will and are already growing off the back of the fact that the foundry will be is already operating and expanding down in Newport. And as you'll know also, that the Chancellor announced £50 million to site a compound semiconductor catapult in the area, and that is being located in our foundry and is already being constructed and built, and that will be one of, there's only about 13 catapults across the UK, and this will be the magnet, if you like, also to for the greatest research and development and expertise around the compound semiconductor cluster, and probably putting us, well, we probably are now a world leading, or will be the world leading area for this growing industry, because compound semiconductors are replacing the traditional semiconductor, which is silicon based. So there's a massive, huge opportunity. You've got all of many of the industries growing around us, which will be fundamentally driven by having this foundational market of compound semis right in our midst. We'll become absolutely believe we'll become a globally recognized area for this type of expansion. Hence, we've seen and I think the government felt that with the catapult coming down to the area. We invested £39 million into the creation of the foundry. The capital region has no shares in IQE. It has no shares. It's a landlord. It owns the foundry, owns the building. And that £39 million will be repaid back to us over a period of several years. But it's also levering in a ratio of nearly 9-1, £375 million with inward investment from the IQE company. And alongside of that, the growth expected is going to be significant in all of the other areas. And you've got to also remember how we've safeguarded jobs by that investment. All of those that what was Wafer Fab called before it was Wafer Fab, the company, where I forgot what the company was called. Anyway, 300 jobs we saved there because because we'd anchored this foundry there, which really changed around the fortunes of that company. Now I can't think why it'll come back to me in a second why I've lost that name of that company, but. So there may be pundits who are concerned about initial share prices and things, but compound semiconductors aren't just in your everyday electronic communications equipment. They are going to be the bedrock of so much in medical tech. Every type of tech you can imagine, they'll be part of. Photonics, life sciences, various, every type of technical advancement will have these new types of conductors within them. And so I think the opportunities are huge for our area, and we need to capitalise on those. And we are in this for a long game. So I understand the concerns around IQE, but I can reassure you that from the regional perspective and Monmouthshire's perspective, we do not own shares in any company. We are, and Bob is a director on the foundry, which is the company which is the landlord to to this growing information. Bob, his technology, and Bob might want to reflect further on that. As for the deeper views you say about the longer term plans, and without straying into the LDP, even though it's touched in here, very clearly, if we want to move to a more radical structural reform, which requires the growth in so many areas, as I touched on earlier, infrastructure is going to be massive. There's going to be a need for us to look really heavily at that, and that's not just about material infrastructure such as roads and connectivity and things like that. It'll be the service industries which have to support that growth. The health, the care, all of those things which are absolutely important. You can't grow one bit without the other. It's a great big puzzle which has to be worked out and grown together. But none of us should try to find a reason why something shouldn't happen. We need to find a solution to the dilemmas. Bob, if you talk about the company.
Yeah, just to IQE is not just dependent upon its contract with Apple. There are lots of other areas where they're working in terms of artificial intelligence and driverless cars and in medical science areas as well. The company is not a one-horse race at all. That's what I was trying to think. You're more familiar with those, yeah. So it's not a one-trick pony by any means, and the future for it is great. And we are receiving, and it's not the only tenant that that will go into that building that the company now owns. So I'm confident that in the future that investment will come back to us, and that by supporting the company, we will have built the embryo of a really good new technology business for South East Wales.
The other thing, sorry, Chair, I should just mention is that the city deal, there's unlikely to be another city deal going forward, and that's why it's important. Our investment fund, which is about 495 million, which is in the gift, if you like, of the cabinet, because 734 million of the city deal is invested in Metro and developing the Metro. Even though we will build off, there'll be huge opportunities to build off around the Metro. It all has to be interlinked. But that 495 million has to be an evergreen investment fund. It's not a grant pot where we chuck money out and it just goes. That's why the ratio of leverage needs to be around 8 to 1. Because 495 million has to lever in, because it's really the money which is in our gift, 4 billion inward investment. So we know that 38 billion will remain evergreen because it's been paid back, and it will come back into the pot. But in the meantime, it would have levered in 375 or 85 million, can't remember the figure, into that specific from that specific area. Let alone the growth which is going to drag in with the expanding parts of the cluster which are going to sit around it.
Can I just come back to Councillor Becker's comments? First of all, I would suggest to him that wherever we build in the future, if we're building new houses, we will always get people who are living around that area saying, no, it's not our area that should be built on, it's the other area. Last time round at the LDP, we had huge objections from Monmouth saying, oh, it shouldn't be in Monmouth area, it needs to be down in the south. And I've no doubt that we will get similar objections as we move in. But nevertheless, whatever policy we decide to take, whether we take a radical approach or a gentler approach as we move forward, we are going to have to face up to some really difficult decisions as we move forward. He talks about the mix of housing. Yes, you're right. We desperately need more affordable housing. And inevitably, when you're dealing with the 5 large developers, what they want to do is to build as few affordable houses as possible. And when we have our own land, then we have the opportunity to look at new ways of developing that land, as we are in fact doing down in the south at the moment. So yes, we will look at that when it comes to our own land, but we also have to acknowledge that most of the land that will come up for sale, for development, will be in private hands, and it's a lot more difficult when it comes to that housing. But we could not simply only use our own land. Indeed, we're not permitted to give preference to our own land when we're considering it, the LDP, when it comes to that. So, yes, I absolutely acknowledge the problems, but they are problems that we're going to have to find a way through. They're not simply a problem that we need to say, well, we can't do it because we've got a problem.
Thank you, Chair. Having read the reports, it's fairly obvious that we can't stay as we are. The county would go bankrupt if we continued along the path that we're on at the moment, I believe. So we need to be moving forward with confidence and courage. We need to decide on a vision, the where, what, when and how, basically, and move forward in conjunction with the new LDP. That said, I have concerns, particularly about the infrastructure aspect in towns that may have more development. I think the excitement is felt more in the south than in the north. A lot of this may not reach us in the north of the county. And also, I noticed that in the life science and healthcare numbers in the report, that there's a large number of employees that are listed there, but they're in the state sector rather than in the private business sector that we need to develop wealth and create wealth. Okay, thank you.
Anybody like to respond to that?
I think, Richard, I welcome those views. I think confidence and courage is something, and it's a challenge for members because you've got to. It's a difficult ask in the face of often huge NIMBYism and backlash. And it's all right for everybody to have it, but long as it's not done in my bit. And we all face that as local members. It is a challenge. I think one of the things, harping back to the city region again, really, one of the key drivers for city region is how do you spread opportunity? How do you move opportunity from the M4 corridor up into the region so you can create opportunities and raise aspiration and things within those areas? And I suppose if we come back to a Monmouth scale, it is important that we think about how, I really do believe this, think about how we create those opportunities all over, because Monmouth may only be 20 miles up the road, but without a great transport system, one which is regular, and how do those young people access the jobs which could grow? If they don't grow in their midst, how can they access the jobs which are growing somewhere else? And I think that's the deeper conversation that we still need to have about the future of the metro, its connectivity, and what modes of transport that can drive. What are our opportunities to unlock all of the potential in the county, so that inward investors see Monmouth town and its area and its surrounds as being just as desirable to invest heavily into future technologies or whatever. There's great opportunity up there now, but how do we even enhance that? Because that is also the gateway to Wales. The south is the gateway to Wales, but people often forget Monmouth is the gateway to Wales too. And we need to capitalise on that. And I think the LDP, I know that's because it's referenced in here. That has to take cognizance, I think, of the opportunities which can unlock. Because if you're quite right, if houses are going in one area, we need to have the employment to be able to match those. It'd be far better if we can keep people in their own areas instead of having everybody moving around all over the place. So I absolutely take your points about the excitement maybe in the south, and that concerns me, but we're not getting a message of how we can excite the north as well.
Thank you, Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chairman. We did need to have a vision, obviously, but we've starting from a fairly strong position, I think. Transport-wise, we've got good access, as Peter said, from the Midlands, from London. The A449 is the main artery, really, of this area. We do need, I think, to get some... we've lost quite a lot of industrial area to house building. The Fairfield Maybe site has gone, Dendix at Chepstow. Then up at Monmouth, you've lost the Haddock Road site. Haven't lost it, I think. That could possibly be redeveloped for technology or light industry. Abergavenny has lost Dendix brushes, Cooper filters and mill steel fabrications in recent years. So there is an opportunity, I think, for development. Although the house has gone on those sites, there is room in the area for possible redevelopment. It's not going to be the old heavy industry. It's going to be a very, very light, a lot of office work rather than heavy manual work. But to back that up, we obviously have to get the right housing policy. Affordables should, wherever possible, get up to the required rate. I think it'll be a struggle to get 35%, quite honestly, but possibly 25% might be a more practicable option. Anyway, that's just my views at the moment. Thank you.
Some good points there. Thank you, Councillor Strong.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think in some senses the two reports are actually linked, and it's obviously the danger is in straying into the LDP. I think I did listen to the consultant who came and was talking about 20,000 houses and so forth, and the leader has just mentioned about employment and housing being related. Some of the examples that were given by the consultant on employment was basically it was linked in a sense. A major employer came into the area and the infrastructure and housing followed. Now obviously there is this chicken and egg situation, but you know, I am concerned about potentially being over-ambitious in terms of the fact that currently the LDP is 4,500 houses, and we're struggling to meet that particular issue, and there are infrastructure concerns. I'm not keen on this idea in 5.4.3 of home urban extensions, urban sprawl spreading out from towns, and then you know, threats to villages and so forth. I think that's, and it says tapping into existing service capacity. Well, we've already coming across the fact that the infrastructure in the existing service capacity can't cope. So in a sense, I think we've also got to be realistic about this, and really the aim should be towards getting internal employment opportunities, you know, hand in hand with housing. So because otherwise, if we don't, what will simply happen is that effectively we will become a Bristol suburb, effectively, and we'll be commuting out to Bristol, and I don't see that is a particularly good vision, but there is a danger of that vision. The other thing is that in terms of the age and the demographics of our population, we obviously say we've got an average age of 48, and Cardiff has got 34. Well, in fact, we haven't taken account of the younger people who actually, we're getting people commuting out to Bristol, but we're also getting younger people commuting in to work here, and we only need to look at our council employees for that particular thing to be shown. So I don't necessarily think that we are sort of you know, just effectively a totally elderly population. And the thing that I find quite odd is that we've had a budget on the social care side, and that comes out as underspent, and children and young people comes out as overspend. Well, in the authority I was in before, it was always, you know, social care overspend because of the elderly population. You know, it was a similar sort of place to Monmouthshire. So, well, I think the question is that, you know, are we being realistic in this? Because it does actually follow on to the next report as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Davis. It was just a point of clarification, really. In terms of the report, it's actually an additional 10,000 houses and a 20,000 increase in terms of population rather than 20,000 houses. It's a median age of 48. Thank you.
Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chairman. I think in many ways the sadness about this is that we are coming from so far behind, and in many ways the bridge is such an opportunity, but it is an opportunity for both sides, if you like, and in many ways people can travel from Bristol to this new facility as easy as somebody can travel from Monmouth. And of course in Bristol they have a housing market that is really going through the roof in terms of affordable housing, and the other that is putting the other housing under pressure and making it more expensive, and that is why we've got a load of people coming into Monmouthshire and prepared to pay more money than our own people can afford to pay to get into houses. The other thing that is happening within the county as well is this really vociferous attitude by a lot of people that feel that we have been sadly lacking as a county in making provision in terms of infrastructure. And that is one thing that we have got to put right. I mean, I'm not going to talk about Chepstow, but I will mention the bypass, and then I'll come away from it. But the fact of the matter is, we haven't got a grip in terms of infrastructure in Monmouthshire at all. I've been banging on about city deals for, as Councillor Coxwell, the leader, will remember, for donkey's years. And the thing, there's four elements to it. One is transport, which is key, and we've been sort of ignored, and that was why I thought we had to have a transport committee. We were so ignored by Cardiff, they just didn't want to know about us at all. And indeed, we fought tooth and nail to get the tram system, whatever you call it, on, and that is really important for us. But the other thing is having had a vision of where the houses were likely to be needed, and where the opportunities were for development, like we are fortunate to have now. And if we want that development to grow with subsidiary nursery businesses and whatnot around it, we've got to be looking about not what we need for where we are now. We've got to be looking at what we will be needing for 5, 10, 15 years ahead. And I want to be convinced that we're doing that. The other thing is, which I think is really difficult. I'm not sure that we have got the education bit right yet. The fundamental and important, one of the fundamental and important schools in the area isn't, well, I'll probably be dead and buried before anybody puts a spade in the ground for that. And I think that is really bad. And I'm not sure that I am not sure that the curriculum that is offered, and the Welsh Government have got to sort this out, but somebody ought to be sorting it out. The curriculum that is being offered by the Welsh Government is not the curriculum that is required for the sort of industries we have ambition to get in.
Councillor Dovey, have you got a question at all with relation to...
The point I am making is very simply, we've got a lot to do, and not a lot of time to do it in. Ambition is fine, but we want to throw some serious effort and money into it at the moment. And,
okay, thank you.
I'm not sure where that's coming from.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got a few items that I'd like to raise myself as a chair. As Bob and Councillor Foxwell know, I sent some emails because I was a bit concerned about what we were doing in terms of forward planning. So, you know, I think from our experience with house building, we've seen that we can't rely totally on the commercial enterprises to actually deliver on what the vision is going to be for the county. I think I'm picking up from what the Cabinet members have said, that we are ambitious, but I think everybody recognises that there is a severe amount of work involved in developing a plan. We need to know what are the growth areas within those industries that we want to attract. What are our targets for attracting them? Because we've got to be realistic about that. This is a competition exercise. There are many other authorities who are also looking to, bring in new industries and improve things in their own areas. And what I wasn't getting as a member of this committee was what was our strategy for but the message I'm getting here is that we all agree that we need to have a strategy, and there's a lot of work to do here to take things forward, and it's going to be hard work. So one of my concerns was the resource that we've got in order to do that. Because as members of this committee, we hear little snippets of what's going on, but we're not actually involved regularly in those discussions, I think. So, that's why I had to ask the question, well, what's happening? Because we're not really involved in those discussions. On a personal level, I see lots of opportunity for Monmouthshire. I think the city deal prevents opportunities, but I represent Monmouthshire. I don't represent Newport, and whilst there are opportunities there, I think, there are major issues for this authority if we don't address some of the issues that have been raised in this report. It's going to be very difficult. There's going to be a lot of hard work involved, but I think it's going to be a long-term vision, and there's going to be a lot of work to deliver it, and we've got to think about what resource we're going to put into it as well. So thank you, Cabinet members.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for that. Perhaps I could just touch on David's bit, which he successfully... I'm sure you didn't talk about Chepstow at all within... no, I'm sure. However, I think sometimes if we're not careful, we start convincing ourselves how terrible things are here. And actually, whilst we are seeing infrastructural challenges now, as we are growing and adapting, and there is always a time when you have to re-look at infrastructure to match the growth and aspirations you have for your county. To date, infrastructure, we've invested quite heavily in certain aspects of infrastructure. Just look at your educational infrastructure. I know the bit which you were talking about isn't quite there yet, but it will be. If you look at the history of educational infrastructure investment within Monmouthshire since 2001, it's been probably greater than anywhere in Wales. You've seen a school in stock of a better standard than probably anywhere in Wales. You've seen 2 new examples of investment in education with the 2 secondary schools at the moment, and the plans for the next 2, coming about. So infrastructure is there. We need a greater emphasis, as Armand talks around, future care, and that means working in partnership with the Health Board and other partners through the Public Service Board to articulate those messages strongly. So whilst there are elements of infrastructure which are lacking now, we recognise that, especially as if we want to expand and grow along with a radical expansion programme as might be included in here. The reality is, things have been working relatively well. Obviously, pockets of challenge which we need now to address, and that wider opportunity with the bridge tolls coming off, that joint dialogue between UK government, Wales government, Gloucestershire County Council, Forest of Dean County Council, and ourselves to unlock our corner of South East Wales, because we actually everything else runs down through us, doesn't it, to get out of the county. So we need to unlock the potential for the region, for that part of Monmouthshire, by investing in things like the bypass, so that we can unlock the opportunities of the Western Powerhouse, relieve the burden on Chepstow, and facilitate the infrastructure growth that we need to create the expansion in all directions, housing and industry. So I don't, and the other bit you talked about, which is fundamental to a lot of this, is the skills deficit across the region, the whole region. I'm not going to say deficit, but the reskilling, the alignment of skills to what's likely to grow. Are we in the right place on that yet? There's a significant piece of skills work going across within the region to develop that further in partnership with HE and further education as well, because we need to make sure that young people, even in our own schools, there needs to be a message which we take to our schools tools to make sure we can help people start thinking about, well, what is the future for them in the county and in the region? So there's a big piece around that. We can't look at one piece in isolation. There is a holistic approach needs to take place, and that's what the benefit of this piece of research is doing. It's given us that baseline data to start the conversation, and that's why we come here today, because this is a policy development session. And if there is, I would suggest, Chair, a deeper need, or there will be a deeper need, to develop this policy thinking more, so we can come forward with an opportunity. We can critique it. We can find all the reasons what's wrong with it, and what, but we need to get our heads together collectively as a select function and an executive function to shape that vision and set some milestones down, I suppose, some achievable, tangible goals along that way. Because unless you've got those, politicians generally won't align to something because they can't see an outcome, and it's easier to say no than yes. So we've got a big challenge there. Alan, I think, it links to your points really around, so what is the strategy? And I think that's what we're about today, isn't this? What the grounding of that conversation about what our strategy should be. We've got various documents here now which are giving us that baseline data to shape that strategy, some solid advice. There's advice that say you can stay as you want if you want, but we're going to be down that situation where we're declining and our working populations, we're losing it, and the opportunities to be lost to grow and live and work in Monmouthshire. So we need to have that debate. But I mean, it's something which is going to require us working a lot together, a select, and this is the power of a select. I don't think it always has to be about pre-decision scrutiny and that. It's about policy development. I think we've lost some of that opportunity to shape policy development. So we are genuinely looking for you to help us get this picture right.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. Well, I actually wrote on my pad then that, there needs to be representation, I think, from this committee in those discussions that are taking place in order to produce that plan going forward, because we are on the periphery of it. And probably if we were more involved and able to communicate with each other about what's happening, we'd be in a better position.
Well, I think I think, Chair, I think with respect, I think that's exactly what your committee should be doing. It should be calling for that information, and this is the chamber to do that and shape it. Obviously, because everything which evolves will come via you. But I'll take that back with Bob. How do we include likes of yourself and Paul and other members who are interested into shape some of this in deeper thinking?
Yeah, just as a last comment from me before we move on to Councillor Pavia's questions, it's very challenging, but I like a challenge. The obstacles are there to be overcome. And if we all work together, I'm sure we can overcome most of those obstacles. So, Richard, unfortunately, I can't get any of my emails, so if Richard can ask those questions on behalf of Councillor Pavia, please.
Thank you, Chair. The first question from Councillor Pavia is regarding IQE skills gap. The Scrutiny Committee picked up that there is a skills gap around the Catapult Foundry working, and while this would be an issue early on, there is a concern that this is not being addressed and closed. We have said about the lack of further education, higher education in our county. How does the executive anticipate getting over this challenge? We don't want the draw to Cardiff University. Yes, there's University South Wales presence in Newport, but is there an expectation that there's going to be a specific further education higher education hub, and then in brackets, uni spin-off or a bespoke developed on site? How are they going to work with the wider education sector? And there's a further email regarding the IQ skills gap. Chair, would you like me to read that out? Yeah. And it says, on the back of this, the education hub can't be Cardiff-centric. Bristol has the largest level of inward migration of younger people of anywhere in the UK. Median working age is 33. That was 2 years ago, and it's dropping. How do we intend into tapping into the academic sector in Bristol, spin-offs, sector-related hubs with test bed facilities, etc.?
Councillor Fox?
Yeah, I think I just touched on the the skills gap, and there is a significant piece of work which is happening within the region to start talking to that, and I can't quote that verbatim or anything at the moment, but it's evolving. However, I have spoken directly, and I've listened to the challenges about IQE, their own skills gap, because they recognise that they actually have. There aren't institutions out there that can actually provide all of the training that perhaps IQE might need in some areas, and they recognise that they need to do that themselves within them. They can grow that. They can grow the people they need. But the key thing is that I think that young people and people within our region need to know what the opportunities are, and I think something which came out of the City Region Select Committee was that perhaps the region don't know well enough what the opportunities are sitting among them, and I know that IQE are very keen to talk to our young people and talk to schools. Indeed, schools have visited there to see the sorts of opportunities which could unlock. But I think there is a deeper piece of work about how we prepare our region for the future. And I think I touched on that when I was responding to David David's points about, how do we start getting our young people in our own schools aligned to what's around them. So when they're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up, they can actually say, well, actually, I want a really high-paid job with advanced technology, which is, I know, quite local, and I want to look at uninvasive healthcare products, which are going to be highly, those sorts of things which are in our midst and in our future. I'm hoping that the skills paper, when it becomes more developed, will be in the public domain, and Paul, as part of the Cardiff Capital Region Select Committee, will be able to interrogate and challenge that quite rightly when it finds its way there.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Fox. Councillor Greenland?
Yeah, just to add on IQE. IQE would be very keen to take people directly from school and give them the training in-house. They would like to take people who have aptitudes to train them up as technicians and then into engineers. They would give them the opportunities for further development, to get a degree, and further development beyond that if they wanted. And they would offer a salary which is very high for somebody leaving school. Those are huge opportunities. Just imagine, as a young person, not having to face the issues of student debt, but instead being able to earn a high salary as soon as they leave school, and being able to gain skills in this new industry moving forward. In fact, one of the directors of IQE started out with an apprenticeship with British Leyland. He's very keen on doing similar things in IQE. So I'm not sure whether our head teachers have been around yet, but I have put the opportunity for head teachers to go and have a look at that, and so that they can direct some of their youngsters to apply directly from school rather than go into the spiral of student debt. What an opportunity that is there for some of our young people.
Thank you, Councillor Greenland. I know members have other questions, but I think now we've...
It is very much on CCR IQE,
so... Okay.
Thank you. It's about capitalising on the opportunity, something that you've talked about, leveraging that. There's a sort of reticent to commit to the idea of further education element of our mix, but I think we're missing a trick there. It's great that IQE want to offer this to people with aptitude. That doesn't leave a clear pathway for the rest of the youth of our county. At the moment, the only clear pathway for the rest of our youth in general is the one that leads out of county, and we need to change that. And I think a further education part of the mix could be a strong part of that. Also, I would say that, the next stage of the catapult, it's mooted to have on campus some kind of security sort of focus which could easily dovetail into a further education settlement. If that were in county, this is something that, you know, brings that to us. Also, when we talk about the mix of employment opportunities that we want to bring in as inward investment, we should be looking at those shared workspaces. I know Kathy's doing work on, but we should be looking at those from the get-go, because if we are going to service Bristol and Cardiff, why do people need to go there at all if there is a really decent, purpose-built shared workspace on their doorstep? Equally, as well as the shared workspaces, we should be looking less, I think, at startups and more at grow-on phase companies. These are the companies whose owners and workers have reached a stage of life where they value the things that we provide as a county, the rurality, the quality of life, the community. You know, we should really be enticing them rather than necessarily looking at start-up sort of facilities. I think that's where we live economically. I also have a couple of quick questions on CCR, which is one, when you talk about inward investment, we've got to get this return on. How do they define inward investment? You know, those were some big numbers that you said for what we spend, what we get back. How are they defining, you know, the measure of what we get back, so that we can sort of identify what we can and can't sort of aspire to?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Jez. A couple of things. First of all, Bob captured very well what IQE are doing, but also what IQE recognises they have a range of jobs with opportunities within IQE, the highly technical ones, but also there's a lot of more vocational roles as well, and so there's a range of things can be offered within that area, and any of the growing micro semis or whatever. There's huge opportunities for lots of different young people. We just need to point them in the right direction. I think there's a signposting opportunity for us all in doing some of that. So but the catapult is great that it's coming there, and cyber and things like that are going to be a really important aspect, I'm sure, within the they will be within the region. It's a huge area. It's one of the massive growth areas as well. And the shared workspaces, we see things like ICE in Caerphilly, we see Tramshed in Cardiff. There is some initial thinking about what could happen in Monmouthshire around that, so that actually growing businesses who want to scale can coalesce around each other and advice and support and those things. I mean, that's a really important area to help breed the best and growing companies. They need to feed off each other and they need the support to find their way forward. The point on investment, with the Economic Growth Partnership met yesterday, which is developing the streams, how the investment fund can be delivered from an innovation, from an infrastructure, and from a challenge perspective, 3 funds, and that the process, the framework around that is being developed as we speak, and it'll be going to Cabinet next Monday. But what sit beneath those is understanding how various businesses who want to invest in the criteria they need to meet to be able to access the various funding. And that's really important. And some areas might be really, really strong, but may not hit the buttons to unlock opportunities into that funding stream. So that's where we need to be joining up with other opportunities or funding streams across the region. That was part of the city deal, was to join up resources and signpost those to the other supports to grow them, so they may be into a position where they can access the wider investment fund and give the return we need. We need that return in those sorts of ratios, significant ratios, to keep it evergreen, so we can actually make that 495 million keep replenishing itself and hopefully levering more than 6 billion in the longer term.
Thank you, Councillor Falk. I'll take one more question from Councillor Dovey, and then I'll sum up and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you.
Very short one. And I've got to go back to Chepstow School, if I might. We're talking about the training and what is required locally. Is there not a case that could be made skin a cat two ways here. With Chepstow School again, why don't we talk to IQE and ask whether they would be prepared to be involved in the development of a school which focused on technology within the area. They might be prepared to make a contribution. Let's just think out of the box for a while and see if there is a model, because it's happening in the Forest of Dean with the Berkeley College is heavy involvement in that from GCHQ investing in there. There is no reason at all why we couldn't, I believe, put together a case that would enable us to get on with the one serious issue we have in getting our education at secondary level through in a timely manner and servicing the needs of IQE and ideally new businesses coming into the area. And I think it would be an incredibly good trick to pull if we could pull it. And I would recommend that to the House, as they say. Only one other thing. There is a resource that we had, and we invested an awful lot of money, and I hope that resource is being used, and that is Kelly Byrne, who we sent to the States, to LA, and she was really went there to make sure that we knew what was involved in the city deal. I hope she is making a good contribution to what we are doing at the moment.
Councillor Fox, would you like to respond?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, specialisms in school would be great, but in Wales we're not allowed to do that. Okay, quite constrained in the education system in Wales, and however, if academies can be created, we see things like software academies, cyber academies, and those things are in our midst already. But the aspiration which seems to be able to be achieved the other side of the border is, I don't believe, unless somebody corrects me, to create that specialist, if you like, or a specialism, or I don't think it's available to us. What's important for me is making sure we have really high quality, fit for purpose educational establishment in Chepstow, as we've got one now, but not to a new build. We need to see that there, and we'll have that in time. As for Kelly Byrne is, as you know, the director of the City Deal now, and she has been a fantastic asset. She is a fantastic asset to the region. The pace of work she's driving is astronomical. She's creating fantastic relationships across the UK, raising the profile of the City Deal, helping to develop the key parts of the City Deal, like the Economic Growth Partnership and its work in developing our regional industrial plan. But you rest assured, while she was a great loss to this authority, she is a massive gain to the region. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. There's one more question from Councillor Pavia, I understand, and then we're moving on.
Thank you, Chair. One more question from Councillor Pavia regarding social care. Welsh Government has made social care a key priority area in its Economic Action Plan, Prosperity for All. Adult social care generates 2.3 billion for the Welsh economy, and there's a sizable portion of that will be in the capital region area. However, we know there's market fragility in dom care and in residential care that needs to be resolved, and while integrated working with the NHS is important, it is not going to create capacity in the private and third sectors. Monmouthshire County Council has led the way on innovative models of care. Raglan Project is a prime example, and Crick Road has great potential. How does the Executive feel it can take the county's innovation in this sector into the wider capital region? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. If you're looking, well, you're obviously looking in. Thank you for the question. Social care is going to be fundamental, and of course the city region is a huge amount of the workforce is in the public sector, and one of the key areas from an innovation point of view we want to look at is public service test beds. How we can actually use the innovation we create or evolves, and actually scale that to unlock huge opportunities via procurement or whatever, or using the data, which is harvest the data, big data. There's a whole range of things where the public service sector has huge opportunities as well as the private sector, and we need to embrace that and look deeply into that. I haven't got all of the answers for it, but if we can radically change the way we offer care and we make it not just more efficient but far more suitable, that's got to be something the region will embrace. There's a huge amount of work needs to, a huge amount of opportunity around all of those things and other foundational parts of the economy.
Thank you, Councillor Fox, and thank you all for your contributions. Just to sum up, I think we all recognise that we have enormous potential within Monmouthshire. There are lots of opportunities. There's a lot of work required in order to get us where we need to be. I think I've made the point, and I'm sure Councillor Pavia would make the point, that the Economy and Development Committee are very anxious to be involved and to help wherever we can. And I hope that you'll take that forward, and we look forward to progressing and doing the things that are needed to be done in Monmouthshire. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chair. Take on board that, and we'll talk to about how we can actually bring more people into the fold and shaping some of this stuff early on before it gets to you formally.
Thank you. We move on to the next item on the agenda.
Yeah, many thanks, Chair. So this report relates to the draft issues, vision and objectives for the new local development plan. Members have already picked up on how inextricably linked it is with that wider growth strategy piece that was being discussed before, and putting these items together on the last couple of agendas has been deliberate for that purpose. I think, as been alluded to, the first paper is looking at a strategy and a vision for the council, and the LDP is very much an enabling tool for establishing that strategy in a land use context. So members are all familiar with what a local development plan is. It is very much a way of shaping the future of the county and our communities between now and 2033. And one of the first steps in that is looking at what are the issues facing the county and our communities, what should the vision be for our new LDP, and what objectives should we set to try and tackle those issues. So we've had a workshop with Economy and Development Select Committee and all members invited. And that was coupled with a presentation from the consultants doing the Economies of the Future work. We've been out to all but one of the clusters and area committees. One meeting was last night, so the feedback's very fresh. One meeting was postponed due to the snow. And we've gathered an initial summary of some of that feedback, bearing in mind the deadline for publishing this report in Appendix 2. So what we're seeking today from the committee is any further feedback on the vision, objectives, or the issues that we've raised, and then further discussion on those if needed, and an endorsement that we proceed with those. But in the context that we would recommend that the objectives are amended in the light of some of that consultation response, and it's a slightly strange recommendation to the committee in that regard, because we're suggesting that the preferred option is to amend the objectives based on the feedback, but we haven't got all of that feedback yet, so we're not presenting amended objectives to you, but we're seeking your input into those matters to help shape them. The next stage for us will be reporting it into Cabinet with those amendments for their agreements. So we're seeking any further feedback from yourselves on the issues. If you think there's anything you disagree with or anything missing, the objectives, the extent to which they address those issues, and the vision, and we will use that together with all the other feedback we've had so far to tweak those and send it on to Cabinet. A slight further caveat that this continues to be a refinement exercise as part of the preferred strategy for the LDP, and that will come to Council and be part of a far wider public consultation and engagement exercise in the autumn of this year. If it's helpful, Chair, Rachel is going to do a quick summary of some of the feedback to date, but we are conscious some of it was from yesterday, so isn't in the paper before you, and there's a meeting at least to go, and we'd welcome your feedback too.
Thanks, Mark. As Mark said, the feedback received to date, until a certain date, because we've had extra meetings, is in Appendix 2, so I'm not going to go through that verbatim. It's there for you to see. But the comments cover a range of topic areas. I think it's fair to say we've picked up a lot of those in the issues that we've identified so far. But there are some additional ones that we can incorporate. And as Mark said, the objectives and vision will be refined as we work through the process up to preferred strategy stage. So the topic areas include population, housing and economic growth, issues around, we've had housing development but lack of jobs to match, difficulty of retaining younger people, quite a lot of discussion around infrastructure, around existing capacity and future capacity, and concerns that infrastructure should be in place prior to development taking place. Housing and affordable housing, I think everyone recognises the significant need for affordable housing in the county, and the provision of that will help retain younger people. Issues surrounding economy and employment, as talked about just recently, need for employment as well as housing to retain younger people, need for small site industries across the county. Then tourism, leisure, need for more hotels, accommodation to increase staying visitors because of the economic benefits associated with that. Retail high streets, we all know the issues facing the high streets at the moment, and there's some discussion of how the LDP can seek to influence that and address those issues. Commuting, linked to the removal of the tolls, concern that Monmouthshire could become a commuter county. However, it's recognised that it's difficult to tackle the commuting problem. There was also some discussion around climate change, zero carbon developments, and the role of education, increasing skills and linked to employment. So as Mark said, we're going to refine the issues based on the comments we received, bring those back to Cabinet, but the objectives and vision will be refined as we move forward to the first strategy stage to take account of the options that we're looking to develop. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Members, have you any comments you'd like to make? Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you. Hopefully I'm coming in at the right report now. I mean, reflecting back on what was said before, about the affordable housing and looking at different solutions to that. Obviously one of the main aims is to increase the number of young people who can live in the county, and I do appreciate there is a problem there, but as I say, I think there's other solutions that we can look at rather than just looking at the housing developments side. I was interested to hear about the comment of infrastructure prior to development taking place, because that doesn't seem to be within the actual vision. If you look at the proposed LDP vision, it's on page 101 of the report. And what I've done is I've compared that to the previous LDP vision, which is on page 44 of the LDP. And one of the things I am concerned about is that I think Councillor Becker was talking about how the rurality and the quality of life actually attracts people here, but I can't see that within this LDP vision, current one, but I can see in the previous one. For example, it talks about Monmouthshire's historic market towns of Abergavenny, Chepstow and Monmouth, and then it also talks about appropriate development opportunities will have been provided in the county's rural area while at the same time its high quality natural environment and the distinctive rural character of Monmouthshire will have been preserved and enhanced. That is actually deleted from the current vision. And I think actually for Monmouthshire, that is actually our unique selling point. And I think it's important that we've talked about previously about a bold approach, but I think we need to have a balanced approach about where we actually want our development. And I was a little bit concerned where it says in the replacement LDP vision, the best of the county's built heritage countryside landscape. Now that implies that, for example, there's a list and we only take the top 3 and ignore the rest. So I think best of should actually be deleted from that so that we do protect the county's built heritage, countryside landscape and environmental assets. So I think that's the main thing I'm concerned about. And I would also like to see the LDP put in some of those ground rules that were put in relation to when we were looking at unallocated sites, because that did do things like look at the importance of green wedges and preserving village identities and distinctiveness and that type of thing. And obviously, in planning areas, the idea of preventing urban sprawl is one of the basic principles. I mean, looking at Monmouthshire itself, it's composed of small towns and also of villages. Now, in a sense, we don't really want to, even if you look at new settlements, we don't actually want to ruin that picture, because somebody in Chepstow recently said to me, I moved to Chepstow because it was a small town. I don't want to live in a city. I think, and the comment I made about why the young person came back to this area, it was because of what we've got. And I think in a sense, tourism is part and parcel of that. And, we could develop our tourism side much more. So I think that we need to have those, and villages in this development plan seem to be looked at in terms of, they're needing better facilities and better transport. Well, they do need that, but they also need to protect their distinct rural character as well. And I can see that being used as a method of massively extending villages. And I think we've got to be careful. We've got some really nice places, historic places, and we've also got some historic villages and nice places in Monmouthshire, and we need to be careful that we do actually preserve those, because otherwise, we'll actually be ruining the fact of why people want to come to live here in the first place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. There was a number of points there.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd agree with a lot of the points that the Councillor Brown's made in terms of how we have to strike that balance. And we've tried to make that clear in the presentations to the area committees and the cluster groups, that it is very much, I think we've been quite candid about how it's balancing aspirations for brownfield growth and demography and affordable housing against economic benefits of tourism, the beauty of the county, which is what attracts people to live here, and not doing things that ruin the very thing that makes the county special. I understand the point that's being made about the wording on the vision for protecting the best of our heritage and landscape. That's very deliberately put in there, because if we say we're going to protect our countryside, then the vast majority of the county is countryside, so we're effectively saying we're not going to do anything. We cannot have some growth and protect it all. So to my mind, it's appropriate to say we're protecting the best of it. I understand the points being made about people choosing to live in villages and having regard to the scale of those, their infrastructure, but also just the character of them. And that's completely valid. That's part of the LDP and the planning process. So again, balancing that scale of growth with maintaining that. I mean, we're a very long way off Chepstow being a city, a very long way off, and that isn't a isn't our ambition either. Discuss. In terms of, I noted down a couple of other points you made.
I don't think you should be derogatory about people's real concerns.
Oh, sorry, Chair. I wasn't being derogatory about anyone's concerns. But I think we're a very long way off Chepstow being a city. It's a relatively small town in the grand scheme of things. Big for our county.
It's certainly got a lot of traffic in it.
Councillor Brown.
In terms of the LDP ground rules, they would certainly be incorporated via LDP policies, but they wouldn't be, the vision wouldn't be that detailed. That is the content of the LDP. Things like green wedges, which directly links into the points that Councillor Brown was making, they are designations made through the LDP process. So the current green wedges would be reviewed and reinstated or amended or deleted as part of that process. But the purpose of them is exactly what Councillor Brown says about preventing the coalescence of towns and smaller villages to protect their identity. So that wouldn't form part of the vision, but that is 100% part of the LDP work that comes forward. The last point is in terms of a more specific mention of villages in the vision. Again, we were mindful of not having such specific wording at this stage because it almost preempts what the strategy is and where growth might go, and we haven't been through that consultation process yet. So if the conclusion of growth strategy is there should be a level of growth in villages or complete protection of villages or something in between, we can refine the word into the vision to reflect that if we need to. Thanks, Chair. Oh, sorry. There was one more point, which is probably the most significant one in some ways, around having infrastructure before development. I mean, that's a recurring theme, and I completely understand the challenge, but we do have to have a pretty honest conversation about how infrastructure is built, and it is largely funded by development. So getting the infrastructure before development is very much a challenge and possibly unrealistic where the infrastructure is delivered by bodies other than MCC. And when it's delivered by bodies like MCC, then there's big questions around funding and delivery also that we need to look at. But as Rachel mentioned, the infrastructure piece was loud and clear, I think county-wide in terms of our meetings. You'd expect it to be particularly so in Chepstow and the south of the county where there's some very current challenges, but it was county-wide, and that view is there. So as we make clear at those meetings, we have to assess infrastructure needs as part of the LDP. We're going to be doing a local transport plan as something to sit alongside the LDP, but then it's also looking at the other infrastructure, so schools, primary healthcare, public transport, active travel, and the countryside itself as green infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, just to say that I think that all of us would want to ensure that we protect this county, especially those of us that are living in it. We certainly don't want to spoil it. But as Councillor Brown acknowledges herself, there is a problem for young people, and there is a problem for them having affordable houses. And if we are to provide those houses, then we are going to have to build, and actually I would suggest to you that we have to build on greenfield sites, because we have very few brownfield sites left, and when a developer does try to build on brownfield sites, they will find reasons why they cannot provide the numbers of affordable houses that we would like to see. So yes, we want to protect it, but that does not mean that we should not move forward, and we cannot move forward, because I think we have to move forward and actually bite the bullet. It will be challenging. Most definitely it will be challenging, and the infrastructure question is something that we have to answer. But just because we have a challenge doesn't mean we should turn around and say, oh, we can't do anything.
Councillor Watt.
I mean, it's not just challenging for Monmouthshire, but Wiltshire's another good example of where they've had to embrace the level of, can I say, political with a small p, but localised activists who are absolutely adamant that they do not want houses is not only is it it's a really big political challenge for Monmouthshire. So I understand your pain. I mean, us that represent more urban, semi-urban wards have had to deal with those issues a long time ago. But we've all adjusted. Every time there's been a new development, those people have been taken into the community and have been absorbed, and they become active, members of the community. I think, but what I wanted to say was, on that, I guess that semi-urban aspect of it is that this area has been through this before. It's not the first time we've had mass, if you like, kind of intake of people. Llanwern, I know it's kind of looks like what's left of an apocalypse now when you go down the link road, but effectively, we had to, Newport and us had to deal with a lot of people from, different parts of Wales that not only came in but changed the culture and enriched our community on a massive scale. The Caldegot, if I can say that for Caldegot, it was a tiny little village, and then suddenly it became a town, a proper town. The community flourished. It was a tremendous place actually to grow up in. Chepstow, my ward, for example, Western Avenue, the oldest street, one of the oldest streets of that part of Bulwark. Every third house, sorry, indulge me, but had the same lock as the first house. So, but they managed to work things through, and it is a vibrant community. The challenge is for it, though, that what you have is a lot of people coming in, buying up those properties, renting them out then, and then, people's salaries are disproportionately spent on, disproportionately high rented. So we have to address the social aspect of it if we're going to protect our younger people, because this county is simply not viable in 15, 20 years' time to preserve us in our old age. If we don't have and preserve the existing people. Jez's point about, if you like, those kind of those people's, I guess, kind of families, young families potentially coming in. He's absolutely right, because that's part of the proposition. We can never directly compete with Bristol. It's impossible. We just haven't got enough bars for a start. But I guess what I'm saying is that has to be part of a strategy and a vision for this county. But that also then entails families, young families want good education. And it breaks my heart, it really does then, to witness in Chepstow School, and I'm sorry to bring this up, but be effectively knocked into or pushed back into the long grass for at least 7 years. We should have gone ahead with that now, because we'd be ready for it in 3 or 4 years' time. The school over the other side, it simply can't cope with the numbers that I think they've got an intake of 317 children last year. I don't know what it is this year. So we need to, I know that you've made some huge improvement in Caldegot School. It's a fantastic facility, so on and so forth. But Chepstow needs some immediate attention there. So I think personally you need that forward. My other kind of point is, and it's a question, is the length of this consultation, the local development plan, and then public consultation. We talked in this committee then about consulting the public, and I know you're going to think, oh my God, there's going to be this wave of kind of people that have all different sorts of opinions coming at us from social media, every angle, camped outside your house with an opinion, and that probably will happen, but we have no other choice. But we have to meet that now. I don't think that we can go, you were talking around about kind of 24 months before the LDP's completed. If there is a broad political consensus, and I hope to God there is this time, because I couldn't deal with the pain and discontent and the fallout from the Conservative Party from what happened last time. So I'd hope there would be in the future less partisanship, but that can only come about through proper consultation and building consensus now. That's it, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, sir?
Yeah, Chair, they're fair points in terms of consultation and engagement, and it is, being honest with you, it is quite a challenge because we've been set a much tighter timetable than last year. 3.5 years start to end might sound like a long time, but it was 7 years last time, and that certainly wasn't uncommon. But the timetable we've got, the regulations, there's only essentially 2 statutory consultation points. We've introduced various other engagement and consultation points. The next 2 key ones being consulting for 4 weeks in coming months around growth options and spatial options, and then the statutory one, which will be 6 weeks engagement around the preferred strategy, so the level of growth and how it should be distributed in a broad sense around the county. So they're both this calendar year, and our key ones. And as part of that, we're thinking around how we do it. So we don't want to just turn up at area committees and point at a PowerPoint. We were speaking last night at the cluster meeting about maps and pins and some more interesting stuff, and trying to get that engagement. And again, a conversation we've had before about going into schools, trying to engage with different people, and get the most rounded voice we can to present back to you. And also, Chair, obviously you'll know, but we've agreed to use the Economy and Development Select Committee as a basis for a workshop. So a series of workshops will be put out there with all member invitation to try and get some challenge, a healthy challenge, and some sanity check in the process, and some consensus internally, and the feedback from the communities you represent as we go, rather than you perhaps feeling like we've turned up with very big decisions at very key stages, and you haven't really heard much about it beforehand.
Thank you, Mark. I've got Councillor Becker next, followed by Councillor Roden and Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chair. I'll say something unpopular first. I'm in favour of building houses. I really do think that I've had some of my previous work was in the RSL sector, and I feel the housing crisis very keenly, and it's something that we need to address. However, it's sustainable growth. It's about sustainable types of housing, and I think that whilst we do struggle with NIMBYism in all our wards, and particularly in Chepstow at the moment, there's a very vociferous group opposing things, there comes a point where actually there's a genuine concern there that it's spilt over. This is not just NIMBYism now, but we spilt over into there is a problem with sustainable growth. That our roads in that area, our joint study that we've done with Gloucestershire says that we're going to be over capacity by the end of this year, and that's without building anything. So we do need to look at where that we cross that line into sustainable growth. Question for Mark, really. Part of our problem is our housing mix. What can we use the LDP? How can we use it to change that housing mix? I know that we are limited in the levers that we can pull to try and encourage developers to give us the sort of thing that we need. Is there anything that we don't do at the moment that we could be doing? That we should be figuring into this? It could be simple things like changing our parking policy, or what we define about shared play facilities and things that we ask for, or it could be putting in substantial changes to the sort of trunking spaces for running cables to houses to encourage better broadband provision, things like that. What can we actually do to change that housing mix?
Chair, I think that would be a really good topic for a future workshop, to be honest with you. But to cover some points off quickly, affordable housing, we have a considerable degree of say over it. We will say what mix we want, so how many 2-bed walk-up flats or 3 beds we want, etc. The size standards are governed by Welsh Government's design quality requirements and energy efficient requirements. And the way that model works is pretty effective. Market housing, it's at the moment pretty much the builders will build what they will sell. In Monmouthshire, they would probably be able to sell anything, and so they'll probably aim for the higher value products. And the extent to which that addresses the demography challenge that we're talking about, building 4-bed detached houses isn't going to tackle some of that. So how do we address that? Because we have the affordable housing need, but also a bunch of 20 to 40-year-olds that if there was a different product available, they could get on the housing market, theoretically. So that is stuff that we do need to look at and have a serious conversation around what is built. In England, there's a set of size standards that the government's introduced, and it's up to councils whether they adopt them. So that's something we could consider. There's things around cost of living in properties, which somebody like an RSL with a long-term view on that property is interested in. Somebody who builds a house, sells it, and doesn't need to think about it tomorrow doesn't have an interest in that. So we can look at policies around that and think around those longer-term energy costs, and also other things like broadband infrastructure, how that's installed. But again, we have to balance up what does that do to viability if we're going to try and attract a different mix of builders, so in particular SMEs. If we're seen to introduce a load of policy hurdles, does that deter them from getting involved? So it's some difficult balances to try and weigh up, and we don't have those answers or all of that evidence yet, but it's certainly something we're investigating. Some fairly radical things around design. In itself, it's not LDP policies so much that reflect this, but there are carbon neutral houses being designed, carbon zero. Again, balance against build cost versus that. But also there's a project called Salsa House out somewhere between Bridgend and Port Talbot. Energy efficiency rating is amazing. If you went to see it and looked at it, imagine that coming in your street, you probably raise an eyebrow and think that doesn't look anything like the context. So there's some of that innovation going on in the housing industry at the moment to try and balance out those objectives. But part of it could be that we accept that things will physically look different. We have debates in planning committee about false chimneys. They do have a place and they do make a difference to the way houses look, but it is a false chimney in the 21st century. Doesn't make a massive amount of sense if you take a step back in some ways. So all of those things need to be looked at. Things around broadband infrastructure, we're in discussion with some of the big developers at the moment to understand what they do. So building regs at the moment requires you to have provision from edge of your front garden to your front door. The bit we need to cover off is the edge of your front garden to the main street, and where the utility providers will come to, and talking through how do we address that. Some of the house builders are saying it's a massive selling point. People are asking about broadband more than they're asking about school catchments. So whether it's a problem that fixes itself from that angle, further discussions needed. But yeah, how can we make, even if it's just something as simple as putting in the ducting under the road when other cabling goes in so that someone else can come along and shove a wire through later, is stuff that we're talking about. Again, no conclusion yet, and how we factor that into an LDP remains to be seen, but we completely recognise it's stuff that we need to consider and talk through. A workshop on that very topic I think will be worthwhile in due course.
Thank you. That workshop on that would be great, wouldn't it? It seems to me then, is there a way in the LDP that you say, we might be creating hurdles and barriers for some of the SMEs that we wish would come and build the house? Part of our LDP should potentially contain, a process for helping those people overcome those boundaries. It's about encouraging the right people to come and build as well, as much. We could be providing that structure as part of our LDP, couldn't we?
Yeah, and there's a requirement in New Planning Policy Wales Edition 10 to have a provision for SME builders within the plan. So that could be achieved in a couple of ways. One, directly in a planning sense. If as soon as we allocate a site for 150 plus units, you're in the realms of 5 PLCs on the whole. There's a couple of smaller builders that are upscaling, but generally speaking, everyone else is excluded. So we could look at smaller sites, how that works. If it's sites that we own as a council, then separate from the planning process, we've got a different control over who buys them, how they're disposed of. That's outside of planning. And as Councillor Greenan said, we can't give different preference to our own land for those reasons. But it is something to bear in mind. So yeah, absolutely trying to think who can build what and where. Another thing that we haven't particularly done in the past is have some kind of prospectus of sites. I think we've always taken the view that allocate land in Monmouthshire and they will come, and they will. But the smaller sites, if we develop some kind of prospectus and proactively advertise them, on a very simple basis, we talk about 5 PLCs. We're a stone's throw from England. There's far more builders over there. So what's stopping them crossing that line? It wasn't tolls in the first place, but it certainly isn't tolls now. Why are they not involved in the Welsh housing market? And can we get them involved?
Quick one then.
Very quick. What can we do in the LDP to stop house builders retaining the roads on their estates, so that they won't allow us to adopt them, and they essentially retain them so they can charge a maintenance fee on the estate? So.
I think at the moment the answer to that's nothing. We can require through the planning process roads to be to adoptable standards, but not require them to be adopted. The plus side outside of planning seems to be that most developers seem to be stepping away from that approach. I think it was a bit of a short-term economic crisis approach, because to have your road adopted, councils would require a pretty hefty bond up front, and they were avoiding that by doing it another way. I think most of them have realised that it hasn't particularly worked for them. Buyers aren't particularly happy about it. So I think it's a problem that's possibly going to solve itself. The Welsh Government's doing some work at the moment, doing a big bit of research into it. So I imagine there might be something from a different angle coming from them to rule it out. But there certainly seems to be concern about that as an approach. Not what you asked, but there's a separate but parallel issue around landscaped areas and whether open spaces are passed to us for adoption or not, or privately managed. Again, it's a similar answer. It's not a ransom strip, but if they're passed to us, we'd require a commuted sum for 20 years maintenance. And the choice for the developer is they could pay that, or they could keep it, have a management company, and the residents pay an annual fee. Doesn't take rocket science to come to the conclusion of what their preference would be. Although, again, a couple of house builders have approached us saying they would prefer adoption. They don't like our commuted sums, but that's something for us to look at. If we're charging what it costs, then that is what they'd need to pay. But it is an issue we need to look at. But in an LDP sense, my current view is we can't have a policy that says all roads must be adopted, all open spaces must be adopted. I don't think there's a legitimate way for us to achieve that through that route at the moment.
Councillor Becker, I think you've had it enough now. Councillor Roden?
Thank you, Chair. Presumably, the decisions on policy and strategy emanating from the economies of the future will impact quite strongly on the LDP. How do you propose integrating the two and the timelines that are required? Thank you.
Do you want to correct me if I'm wrong, Francis? But the plan is to report both of these topics side by side to Cabinet in March. And then we're looking at some kind of paper to Council to get an agreement on a strategy. And that will then inform the LDP, which will come to Council in the autumn for that, the LDP preferred strategy. But I think it comes back to the point I mentioned earlier, and Councillor Greenham picked up on. It's having that Council vision and strategy as the starting point, and the LDP as an enabling tool as part of our toolkit to deliver that. So the strategy comes first and the LDP reflects it. But we can use the engagement around the LDP to help inform that process on the way.
Kath?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to add in then what we'll do then is also look at the economic development, so economic growth and inward investment strategy at the same time. So part of the reason for the economies of the future analysis was to inform the LDP, but also the economic development strategy. So the idea is that we try and track the two to ensure that what our ambitions are can be enabled through the LDP.
At the moment, we seem to have a couple of different visions possible. So when are we going to actually work on deciding which vision we're going to go for?
In terms of picking up on what Councillor Fox said earlier today, it was very much going to be a debate moving forward in terms of how those policies are developed, and that's what we anticipate is going to happen. Do you want to add any more, Francis?
Thank you. I think as we've reflected in the Economies of the Future report that was discussed earlier, one of the key strategy documents that we need to bring forward for debate and consideration is that economic growth and ambition and inward investment strategy. That really does need to come before Mark brings forward the LDP preferred strategy. So the timeline we're working towards is for that previous report to go to Cabinet alongside the LDP visions, issues and objectives, and that will enable us then to start working on that strategic economic report and strategy and policy prior to the Mark bringing it forward in the autumn. Is that okay?
Okay, Councillor Roden, you happy with that?
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you.
Sorry, it's sticky. I didn't think I put my hand up because I hadn't really thought what I was going to say.
Oh.
That's never stopped me in the past, so why not? I think there was. I think this is the problem about the way we go with these developments. I think in many ways we are making exactly the same mistakes that we level at our predecessors, especially at the impact in the towns. And if you look at Chepstow in the towns now, in the estates, you have a situation where people cannot park or don't choose to park on the allotted parking area for their house. Very often, because the houses are designed in such a way, there isn't enough storage within the house for them to, well, live adequately, if you like. Well, probably most of us have got older houses, you know, and there is more room to put things away and that sort of jazz. So you end up with the garage being the storage place. And that means people park out on the roads. And it goes along all the way through sort of generations. You can go back to the times when they were building houses for the development of the steelworks. There was not adequate provision in those days, and we were building the houses, if you like, in those days. If you look at the developments that have happened subsequently, the fact of the matter is they do not cater well for the car-owning.
Councillor Dovey, is there a question in relation to the LDP?
Well, I'm trying to illustrate the issue. I think, well, I'm picking one problem. With the developments we're making nowadays, we are making exactly the same problems, repeatedly. And we are going to have, they're going to be even worse, because if you take the car-owning population, if you take a development that might or might not happen in my area, it's about 200 houses. If you look at that, you can easily say that that is going to be 400 cars, just basically to start off with. And then you get the kids coming along with their car, and that 400 becomes sort of 600, and we have people parking all over the place. So I think we have to think back about what we do, what we demand out of the housing, and also the rules and regulations that we say apply to developments in the area with people who own cars, because the situation just cannot go on as it is at the moment. You can't park in Chepstow to shop, and you can't park in Chepstow to park your car by your house. The infrastructure.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Dovey. I've got Chepstow in again, I notice.
Chepstow, you're welcome to come. It's a lovely place.
Right, I've got Councillor Roger Harris next.
Thanks for letting me in, Chair. Those members that were present in the last council are still, some of us still bearing the scars of the process that we went to get the LDP up and running and sorted. And I can assure all the new members that came in 2017 that if we follow the same procedure, they're going to be heartily sick of the number of consultations they're going to get on this. We're only a minute way into it yet, and you know, we're talking about all the snags so far. But I remember going back to, as I say, to the last council, where we deliberated on the number of houses that we wanted to have built. And the consensus was such, I think it's safe to say, that it's such a wonderful county that we should really build as few as we possibly can. I mean, that's the bottom line. We're not the final arbiters of what happens in the end. It went to a Welsh Government inspector who said, you're not getting away with that. You know, you want so many houses, you're going to have another 10%, and here's the 2 sites that I'm going to put in for you. We are not the final decision makers. At least we weren't then, and I don't suppose we will now. So we need to keep that in mind. And I say the blood on the carpet between inter and intra group arguments, and they both occurred, were quite interesting. So, as I say, if it's anything like the last process, you're all going to enjoy, and there'll be plenty of time for pluses and minuses down the line. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you. There was 2 issues I got to raise. I think, first of all, following on from Councillor Dovey, I think really what he's alluding to is basically our supplementary planning policy in relation to standards, parking. Because, I mean, the Manual of Streets found that, and on garages as well, the Manual of Streets found that more than half of people use their garages for storage. So I think, a consideration of looking at parking standards, but also I think the other issue on transport and private transport within estates is also looking at energy efficient and things that will help our air quality, such as hydrogen cars, electric cars, and basically I was listening to a report this morning from the Mayor of London who was talking about buses that were going to be either electric or hydro driven or hybrid vehicles. So I think this is the area we should move into. But in a sense, does the electricity infrastructure have the capacity to take a lot of charging by people of cars and that sort of thing? So I think there are infrastructure issues that are raised there, but I think we have to look for, for example, on estates, where do we store hydrogen if that's what's needed? And the other thing that we don't seem to consider in planning that was something that was considered in the other authority I was at was, they were putting in cycle racks as part of development, and I think it's something that we don't tend to look at. And in terms of transport and looking at paths and cycle tracks, I think that's part of the planning policy Wales idea, that you should look at walking, then cycling, then cars, then public transport, and then cars, and in that hierarchy. So I do think that those sort of areas is something that could be looked at. The second issue I've got is I was very pleased to hear Councillor Greenland say how we were going to support our historic and distinctive nature of Monmouthshire, and I was looking at the forthcoming report in to do with basically housing and unallocated sites, and it quotes the corporate plan, which says Monmouthshire has a spectacular natural environment, a unique heritage value, and a culturally rich identity. We believe that necessary growth, development and expansion of our place need not compromise our distinctive offer. Indeed, it should complement and enhance it. Now, my difficulty with the current draft vision is that it doesn't include any wording in relation to that protection. I would certainly like to ensure that the last bullet point, for example, about rural nature and distinctive character within the current LDP, and things about historic market towns and so forth, does go in the LDP vision, because if it doesn't, then we're not conforming to what the corporate plan is stating there, and we're actually in a sense destroying our unique selling point. So I didn't get any confirmation that there would be any amendment to this draft LDP vision, and it is important that there is an amendment, because if there isn't, then that actually vision is then grows in a sense into the policy and the strategic sites and everything else. So we've got to get that vision right to start with, and I don't think that the answer I got said that those elements were included, which do definitely need to be included. Thank you.
Mark, would you like to respond?
Yeah, if I could come back on that. And you're right, I did say that, and I do feel very strongly that we have to protect the environment that we've got. That's why a lot of us live here. But the caveat is that we nevertheless need to bring forward new housing as well, and some of that will be on greenfield sites. But it will not be at such a level where we are going to find that we are in an urban area. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in Monmouthshire. But I would also come back to the process that Councillor Roden spoke about. Before we decide on the strategy for the LDP, we have got to have in our mind the strategy for our future economies. Are we going to go along as we have been doing, with the demographic problem getting worse, and just build a few houses here and there? Or are we going to tackle the problem and to bring new economies, new jobs into the area? And if we bring new jobs in the area, we must bring new houses into the area. Until we have decided and agreed the strategy for the economies of the future, we can't then go on to agree the strategy for the local development plan. And if they both come in together, we decide first of all the strategy for the future economies, then that informs us the direction that the LDP is going in. The other thing is, you asked about timetables, about where we're going. Yeah, it is important that members have the timetable as we move forward with the LDP, and there is one down here which we will now put out. Mark will put out to all members so that you are aware of the milestones as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Green. And Councillor Strong, and then I'm going to sum up then.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a couple of quick questions, really, that Mark can answer, I think. The 35% affordable target, is that mandatory, or is it, we obviously are not doing that. Could you just tell me what the figure is and who set it? Also, previously I know there were schemes about where local youngsters could perhaps get a house, and they're on low wages, they could perhaps pay a quarter of the mortgage and a quarter of the deposit and live in it until their circumstances improved, and then they could pay extra as time went on. And one other thing that Doug Edwards used to ask regularly of you, solar panels on new builds, could that be made compulsory almost? Could you perhaps answer those?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. In terms of affordable housing targets, the current targets are 25% in the south of the county, 35% Chepstow and North, and then our small rural exception sites are 60%. Those policy targets are, they're evidence-based, but they're set by us, by the council. So they are all up for review as part of the LDP. So I noted the point you made earlier about the extent to which they're realistic or not. That's all something that will come before council for a decision as part of the new LDP. I'm just thinking through the other two parts of your question. Can you remind me? Sorry, Brian. Yep, sorry. Affordable housing, again, it's our policy approach, but we require affordable housing to be neutral tenure. that in itself is a topic worthy of a workshop, or tacked onto the other workshop, because that does have implications. Social rented properties have to meet Welsh Government design quality requirements. Technically, low cost home ownership, where it's part owned, parts rent free, they don't have to meet those standards. But our policy requirement for neutral tenure, which means people can staircase up or down in the way you described, means everything has to meet those standards, and that has a small but important implication for cost. So one view is the view we've currently taken, that better to have something that has longevity and is high standards. The other view could be you would get more if you did it in a different way. I do have a personal view of this, which I probably won't share now, but it would lean towards longevity and high standards than lots of any old rubbish. So that, I mean, that is up for a proper discussion though, in terms of what those policy requirements are. Again, we have a policy choice that low cost home ownership is 50% of what the Welsh Government says market value is in our part of the county. Other authorities will set that at 70 or 80%. My basic view is 80% of a house price in Monmouth is not affordable. So it would be called affordable housing, but who could actually get it? So 50% is better, but again, that has cost implications. So I think it's about balancing doing that right thing with, a different objective. If you're just going for maximum, you could do something different, hit a number, but perhaps not deliver what you actually wanted. So that's all conversations to be had. And there was a third point, which I remembered when you reminded me of the second point, and I've forgotten again. Solar panels, yeah. I think the argument, there's a policy in the LDP that could support that now. The argument that's consistently made is since the LDP was adopted, building regs have been devolved and the Welsh Government's upped the standards for energy efficiency. And I'm pretty certain that's going to happen again. I think Part L is going to be, of building regs is going to be increased yet again to increase the energy efficiency of the actual building. But there's almost two different arguments. One is about the built fabric, which is largely controlled through building regs, so we wouldn't need a planning policy on. And that works pretty well. The solar panels, though, comes into a further argument about longer term running costs. So if you have an energy efficient fabric of a building, developers will say these other things are just bolt-ons, but they do contribute towards lower running costs in the future. So yeah, it is something that we should be looking at again to see how that works.
Thank you, Mark. If I can just sum up, and members, I think it's been a good session. We've had lots of discussion and good points raised. From my perspective, I think, we must recognise that there are lots of challenges, but staying still and not doing anything is not an option, I think, in any of our opinions here. There are some major issues, but I think Councillor Watts made a good point about getting a consensus, and in order to do that, I think members need to be kept informed and consulted about which way things are going, if not actively involved in it. I think what we mustn't lose sight of here is that we are talking about issues now, but this is going to affect the future generations in Monmouthshire. When some of us won't be in Monmouthshire at that time, we'll be somewhere else. And so there are hard decisions to be made, but I think if we're all involved and we all, come to a consensus about what needs to be done, then we're in a position to front up and stand up and say, well, this is what we need to do for those future generations. And hopefully the discussions will take place, because I'm optimistic. I think there's a lot of potential in Monmouthshire. Councillor Brown briefly mentioned about, the villages and things, and tourism is a major part of the economy in Monmouthshire. My personal view is that there's scope to develop that much further than it is, and to bring in hotels and hospitality, and there's there's employment through that as well. There's lots of opportunities, but there's also a very, very large amount of work. And they say many hands make light work, and I think I am also aware that we're limited in resources as far as officers are concerned, who are working very hard as it is. So any help that they can get, I'm sure they'd be delighted to have. So thank you all for your input. I think it's been a very good meeting. Thanks to the members, thanks to the officers, and thanks to the cabinet members. Thank you very much. Right, members, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda now. And that's the minutes of the special meeting of the Economy and Development on the 18th of December. Any issues with that? Members? No? Okay, move on. The next item then is the ordinary meeting of the Economy and Development. Any issues with that, members? Minutes of that? No. List of actions arising from the previous meetings. Is there any points anybody wants to raise there? Anything to add? The forward work programme. Anybody have any issues there or anything they would like to add to that? No? And the Cabinet, Council and Cabinet forward work programme. Any issues there that you'd like to raise or move forward? No? I think that's it, Richard, is it? Is there anything else that I need to? Well, thank you all for your attendance. It's been a good meeting, I think, and Councillor Becker.
Sorry, just coming in at the end. We did moot the idea for the forward work programme. We were hinting at maybe another planning workshop that we'd be involved in on design points and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it might be worth just noting that we...
Okay. Can you make a note of that, Richard? Another workshop for that?
Thanks, Chair.
Good point. Thank you.